thank you for giving the opportunity to speak to this. But before anybody misunderstands my position, I'm not agreeing with the Trump plan. I am not endorsing it. I think it's terrible.
Yeah.
But what is even worse than Trump's plan is the liberal establishment's naive belief that Trump has no plan and that he's just a fool who accidentally took power from them and who believes his own rhetoric, and he thinks that tariffs will solve everything on their own, and that just like they did after Trump 1.0, when they simply sat back hoping that he would fall, and he fell as a result of COVID-19 and his utter mishandling of the pandemic. They are hoping that again he will go away, and eventually harmony will be restored in the heavens while they return to the White House. That's not going to happen, because he has a plan, and it is a rational plan. It is a well thought out plan. For me, it is a terrible plan in the sense that it works against the interests of the majority of Americans and against the interests of the majority of humanity. But we need to understand it before we fight it. And the liberal establishment are like headless chickens running around in the hope that somehow Trump is going to fail as a result of not having a plan. He's not going to have to fail because he doesn't have a plan. If he fails, he will fail because there will be people and movements that oppose him who understand his plan. So I just wanted to make this clear.
No, it's important. It's an important caveat. Yeah.
Okay. So what is the plan? To begin with, to understand his plan, we have to understand his main gripe, his main discontent regarding the state of the United States. The vast majority of people around the world, and that includes me, we believe that, and I think we're not wrong to believe, that the United States has an exorbitant privilege, and that is the US dollar. The US dollar is the only currency in the world that is in demand independently of what the United States produces. So the only reason why you want the British pound is if you want to buy something produced in Britain, or if you want to go to Britain as a visitor, as a tourist. Nobody else wants pounds, really. Maybe for speculation. Right? But I'm speaking to you from Athens. When I put petrol in my motorcycle, right? Even if it is a Greek company buying petrol from a Greek or a French company that has purchased crude oil from, let's say, Libya. So there's no American corporation involved at all. That act of purchasing gas for my motorcycle increases the demand for dollars because oil is denominated in dollars. So that's exorbitant privilege of the United States. It's what allows, as I was saying before, the Germans to keep selling their net exports to the United States, the Chinese to do this, the Japanese to do it, and how this is all recycled through Wall Street, and it becomes rents for the rentier class in the United States. It becomes rents for the bankers in Wall Street, and so on and so forth. But Trump, while understanding all this and loving it, he loves the fact that the dollar has these exorbitant powers for the United States ruling class, and he's one of them. Nevertheless, he sees this exorbitant privilege also, or primarily, as an exorbitant burden. From his perspective, he's a nationalist. He doesn't like the fact that the United States can no longer build nuclear submarines because you don't have an engineering sector anymore. You're not producing enough steel. He once said back in the 80s, in 1982, 83, I saw a quote from him, that if you don't have steel, you don't have a country. And America is not producing steel anymore in any substantial quantities. It's China primarily, and also Germany. So for him, this exorbitant privilege, which he adores, comes with the exorbitant burden of effectively shrinking the United States. But then he has also an economic theory behind it, which leads him to conclude that this exorbitant privilege is not going to last long, that carnage will come to the United States. And I don't think he's wrong on this. His argument is this. Now, why does the United States have such a large trade deficit vis-a-vis Germany, Japan, China, and so on. Why is it that the market doesn't work? Because if Paul Krugman and all the other liberal establishment economists were right, that markets work to equilibrate through demand and supply prices, interest rates, and exchange rates, the dollar should have fallen because America has a trade deficit. Every country that has a trade deficit, its currency comes down. But why is the dollar not coming down? Because it has this exorbitant privilege, because people want it for other reasons. But from the perspective of Trump's team, not just Trump, but he has a team of economists around him who are not dodos, who are, quite smart. They may be evil, but they are smart. And what they realize is that that's their thinking, that's their analysis, that the reason why the dollar is not coming down is because the central banks of the foreign countries, of foreigners, foreign central banks, hoard dollars. Now, why do they hoard dollars? Because dollar is the reserve currency. So when Germany sells cars to the United States, you have all these dollars going back to Germany. And what happens with these dollars? The vast majority of them, the dollars that are not returned by Mercedes-Benz to New York, they are hoarded by the Central Bank of Europe. Similarly, by the Bank of England, by the Bank of Switzerland, by the Bank of Sweden, by the Bank of Japan, by the Bank of China, increasingly. Right? $3 trillion is held by the Central Bank of Japan. $3,000 billion. That's not to be scoffed at. And why do they hold these dollars? Why don't they convert them into their own currency in order to increase economic activity? Because this is how they preserve their currency at low levels.
Donald Trump, the American dollar, and China. What to watch for during 2025? Donald Trump wants to boost exports, to bring American jobs back to the United States, and to shrink the American trade deficit. For that, he needs a lower value of the dollar. For that, he needs a weaker dollar. But at the same time, Donald Trump wants a strong dollar, and he will not brook any discussion of ending the exorbitant privilege, the centrality, the hegemony, the dominance of the American dollar in international transactions. Can Donald Trump possibly have both? Donald Trump's first problem is that the tariffs that he has invested so much political capital in introducing, announcing, and advocating for will most likely boost the value of the dollar. Why? Primarily because every time there is global uncertainty, whenever there is a problem that emanates from the United States, whether that was the 2008 crisis or whatever crisis there is a paradoxical rush of foreign money into the United States, boosting the dollar. So if Trump's tariffs create global uncertainty, the likely outcome will be an increased value of the dollar. And that's his first problem, because if his tariffs succeed in creating a lot of consternation across the world, in China, in the European Union, in Britain, the result will be that even if imports initially shrink as a result of these large tariffs, the influx of money into the United States of capital is going to boost the value of the dollar, therefore countering whatever effects the tariffs had on limiting imports and enhancing American exports. Donald Trump's second problem is that if he proceeds with his very large tax cuts, especially for corporations and the oligarchs and the very rich in the United States, this is also going to attract into the United States foreign capital. And what will that do? Boost the value of the dollar, and therefore enhance the gap between American savings and investment, with investment being much greater than savings, which is a root cause of the American trade deficit. Trump's third problem is the exorbitant privilege of the United States dollar. It is the reason why every time there is a crisis, especially one emanating from within the United States, the dollar goes up and the US trade deficit gets worse, especially during periods of reduced demand, jobs, and employment within the United States. So if Donald Trump were serious about shrinking the American trade deficit, he would want to do away with the exorbitant privilege of the United States dollar. But of course, not only will he never allow himself to do that, because his best friends, his tribe, are the rentiers and the financiers, who will be aghast if the United States loses the exorbitant privilege of its dollar. It is highly unlikely that Donald Trump will want to be the first American president after the Second World War that loses the hegemonic power of the United States by losing the exorbitant privilege of the United States dollar. Some argue, and I think they do have a point, that maybe what he's trying to do, what Donald Trump is trying to do, is he is threatening the world, China and the European Union in particular, with very large tariffs in order to come to an arrangement with them to accept a depreciation of the Chinese yuan, of the euro, of competing currencies, in order for the United States to see its exports rise and its imports diminish. To cut a deal, in other words, something along the lines of what Ronald Reagan did in 1985, the infamous Plaza Accords, supposedly a multilateral meeting between the Europeans, the Americans, the Canadians, the Australians. But in reality, what the Plaza Accords were about was an ultimatum by Washington on Tokyo. Appreciate the yen massively, or else I'm going to slap large tariffs on Japanese exports.
Well, it brings to memory a movie I saw as a young child. It was a South American movie. I can't remember if it was Brazilian or Argentinian. There was this depiction of a slave who believes very passionately in the institution of slavery. And then the master at some point decides he's anti-slavery and releases him. And the slave is bereft and cries his head off. This is what we now have. Of course, there's always a second reading or an underpinning to the story. If you look at, take for instance, since the gentleman was in Munich, and by the way, I call it the Munich Insecurity Conference this year. You can see this everywhere, not only in the face of that touchingly moved fool, because that's what he is, but also if you walked with us in the streets of Munich, we had 20,000 policemen and women. We had a state of terror that descended upon the city, supposedly in the context of security and peace. It was nothing but warmongering, insecurity, a confirmation in the streets of Munich that NATO is a larger scale mafia that creates insecurity in order to sell protection, and doesn't even do that anymore. And that's why the gentleman was crying. But let me speak to what I think is the underpinning of this vassalage, of the dependence of these gentlemen and some ladies on the United States. If you're a German industrialist, after decades of harsh austerity upon the people of Europe, not just in Greece and in Italy and in Spain and Portugal and Ireland, but in Germany, austerity was created by the German elites, the German bourgeoisie, against the German workers. They practiced it in the 2000s. They practiced it immediately after the financial collapse in 2008. It started in Germany, not in Greece. Then when Greece, the Greek state, went under, they brought it here. We treated us as a hyper-austerity guinea pig in order to take it back through Portugal, Ireland, Italy, Spain, France, to Germany. When you practice this harsh austerity, essentially what you're doing is you're depressing demand for goods and services in Germany. So, if you were running Volkswagen, if you were running BASF, or if you were running Alstom, any of the large corporations, you would look out of the skyscraper of your magnificent offices, and what you would see is a mass of people who are impecunious. They don't have enough money to buy your stuff. So, of course, you don't invest. And what you're trying to do is you're squeezing wages down in order to make your products competitive and sell them to the United States. And it is because of the exorbitant privilege of the dollar, the fact that the dollar is the universal reserve currency, that allows the Americans, as a people, as a country, as a state, essentially to import other people's net exports ad infinitum, without limit. Because, the United States has exorbitant privilege. They can just print the world's currency and import. This is a trade deficit that Donald Trump disdains, right? And of course they pay with IOUs called dollars. So if you're this industrialist in Germany, you can't depend on Germans to buy your stuff, but you depend on Americans and you get dollars. What do you do with the dollars? You can't spend them in Germany. So you have to take them to New York, to Wall Street. There you buy American debt. So essentially the American trade deficit through Germany funds the American army and the American hegemony. Okay? And it funds something else as well. Real estate deals in Manhattan, in Miami, in California. So the realtors in America, the financiers in America, the German industrialists are all in cahoots. They work beautifully together. And this is why. So for instance, when the war in Ukraine started, you saw the devastation that was inflicted upon the German industrial sector as a result of the blowing up of Nord Stream 1, that large pipeline that brought Russian gas from Russia to the heartlands of German industry. Now we know that this was blown up by effectively the Americans, the US, together with Ukraine, together maybe with some Poles, we don't know. But it was certainly not done against the interests or the will of the United States. That was a huge blow to German industry. Huge blow, billions they lost out of that. And they said nothing. Why did they say nothing? Why are they vassals to the United States? I'm expanding upon your question. Well, because they need the American trade deficit to keep sending their stuff there and taking dollars and then pushing their dollars through Wall Street into American real estate and US treasuries. So this is why they are vassals. And then, of course, every economic dependence yields a psychological dependence. And when suddenly the people that keep you rich while your working class is being devastated through austerity, and at some point say, we don't care about you. Because you know what, Mr. Scholz, Mr. Merz, the next chancellor is going to be a certain gentleman, Friedrich Merz. That's what the opinion polls tell us about the federal election in Germany this coming Sunday. We don't need you anymore because you know what? We have created new circumstances, new facts on the ground, and BAS, Volkswagen, BMW, Mercedes, they will shift their manufacturing to the United States in the same way that US manufacturing was shifted to China. Your manufacturing is coming over to us, so don't give a damn about it. So yeah, we're going to end the war in Ukraine without giving you a seat at the table. Why are we going to give you a seat at the table? You're irrelevant. You have worked hard to become irrelevant. Geostrategically, politically, your working class is turning to the right, to the ultra-right, to the fascist right. They become Trumpists. So bugger off.
The Japanese are rolled over. They did as they were told. The reason why Japan's massive growth rates between 1950 and 1985 were eliminated, and why Japan lost its verve, its dynamism, was because they accepted those Plaza Accords. Is China likely to accept a new Plaza Accords? I assign a 0 probability to that possibility. China is no Japan. Japan was an occupied country by the United States. The United States wrote its constitution. There are tens of thousands of American soldiers still occupying Okinawa. China, I will repeat this once more, is not Japan. It is highly unlikely that they will accept, at a time when the capital account of China, if anything, would recommend from an economic point of view a depreciation of the yuan. They will never accept a massive appreciation of the kind that would make the difference for the United States trade deficit in the way that Donald Trump would like. So this is pie in the sky. No new Plaza Accords between the United States and Beijing this time are on the horizon. In that sense, it looks very unlikely that what Donald Trump wants at least both his objectives of shrinking the US trade deficit and maintaining the exorbitant privilege of the dollar, that both these objectives will be satisfied at once in 2025, in the next 4 years. The great question, however, for 2025 and beyond, concerns China's dilemma. Will Beijing decide to stay put, gaining time until the United States' internal contradictions, Trump's conundrum and dilemma, plays out? Or will Beijing make the choice, which it has not made yet? They have not made up their minds yet, and I think reasonably, will, however, at some point make the choice, make the decision to convert the BRICS area into a new version of Bretton Woods. Just as Bretton Woods had at its heart the US dollar, for the BRICS area to have the one at its heart, with more or less fixed exchange rates between the won, the rupiah, and other currencies, and with a view to recycle China's surpluses within the BRICS area, because that would be the greatest and most lethal danger for the exorbitant privilege of the dollar. This is not a decision that has been made as yet. Well, in 2025 or in the years following 2025, I think we shall know the answer. Till then, be well.
They will be paying for the tariffs. And that for the US administration, for the Trump administration, is great. Not only will they be collecting the tariff money, but remember, Congress, and particularly the House of Reps, has the purse strings for tax receipts, but not for tariff receipts. To increase the amount of money that the US government gets from the American taxpayer, Trump has to convince Congress. And there he has a very thin majority, and there is just bedlam. He really doesn't want to have to negotiate with Congress. But the moment he slaps the tariffs, the stream of money goes to the Treasury without any negotiation with Congress. And indeed, he can actually even spend this money. There are some legal impediments, but we know how much he respects those. And that's phase one. Nothing has been accomplished by the end of phase one to bring down the US trade deficit. He has increased his treasury stake through the tariffs, and he's made the foreigners suffer and pay for it. And now comes phase two, which is a grand negotiation. Then he says to them, so what's techno-feudalism? The system that killed capitalism, which is also based on capital, however. Take Amazon.com. Amazon.com is not a market. It looks like a market. You get in there and there are hundreds of thousands of sellers and millions of buyers. So it looks like a market, but it's not. It's a trading platform. Not the same thing. A market has to have a degree of decentralization. You and I walk down a farmer's market or in a shopping mall, right? And there are many different buyers, different sellers. We can have a chat with one another. We can criticize what we see in a shopping window. We can decide not to buy anything or to buy something. You go to that shop, I'll go to that shop. We can talk to different sellers. The moment you enter Amazon.com, nobody talks to anyone unless it's mediated by the algorithm that belongs to Jeff Bezos. And the algorithm only allows you to talk to people with a view to maximizing the likelihood that Bezos is going to get 40% of whatever it is that you spend. That's a rent. Bezos doesn't produce any. I mean, it's wrong to compare and contrast Bezos to Henry Ford. Henry Ford was a monopoly capitalist. He wanted you to buy his Model T. That's it. He didn't want you to ride in a tram, in a streetcar, in a train. He wanted you to buy his Model T. It was his product. The product was coming out of his production. Jeff Bezos doesn't produce anything. Doesn't give a damn what you purchase. As long as you purchase this is hit on Amazon.com, because he retains 40%. And this is rent. Okay? This is a bit like a feudal lord charging rent to producers like serfs, peasants, artisans, ironsmiths, and so on, who were on his estate. He was charging them rent. He wasn't producing anything, right? So this is the feudalism part of the techno-feudalism. The techno part comes from the fact that this is not land that bestows upon our new lords the right to extract rent. It is digital land. It is what I call cloud capital. Because what lives in here, for the first time, is a new form of capital. Capital goods up until recently, the last 10, 15 years, like the production lines of Henry Ford, the electricity cables of Thomas Edison, even the industrial robots which assembled Elon Musk's Teslas, they're all produced means of production. Machines we produce to produce other machines, right? But this is not a produced means of production. It's a produced means of behavioral modification, of modifying your behavior and mine so that we cultivate in our heads and in our bosom desires to buy stuff, which then the same algorithm sells to us directly in these platforms, bypassing real markets. So if markets have been replaced by fiefdoms, cloud fiefdoms, and if profits have been replaced by rents, or cloud rents as I call them, we're no longer in capitalism. We haven't even realized. Is this transition complete? No, it is never complete. Even capitalism was never free of feudalism. Think of the plantations in the southern parts of the United States. They were always feudal under capitalism. So the transition is never complete. Is it complete enough to call this new system techno-feudalism? I think absolutely yes. And you can see this in the inauguration, or was it coronation, of Trump 2.0. They were all there. They were all there. Of course, they were being humiliated by Trump because he had them there to humiliate them. But he chose them to be there because they are the ones who own the cloud capital, which bestows upon the owners of cloud capital, these folks, the greatest power to extract value from the rest of the economy. And, so my point is that there is, both in China, which has a lot of this cloud capital, the big tech China is very impressive. And we saw this recently with DeepSeek and the furor that it caused Wall Street and NASDAQ. And in the United States, these are the two countries that have lots and lots, highly concentrated quantities of cloud capital. And this is why we have a new Cold War between the United States and China, in my view. We can see both in the United States and in China that there is a clash within the regime between traditional capitalists and these big tech cloudalists or tech lords. In China, the Communist Party sorted it out. They took somebody like Jack Ma, who had created the Chinese Amazon called Alibaba, and they said to him, enough. Your power has exceeded the limits of our tolerance. Out you go. And we squeeze your capacity to extract rents from the rest of society. In the United States, that will never happen because they own the government. They own the government, and you see these ruptures now within MAGA, within the Trumpist camp. You have Elon Musk impersonating the vice president of the United States or the president of the United States in the Oval Office. But you also have somebody like Steve Bannon, who is the true ideological guru of the MAGA movement. And I was horrified to find that he's read my book and he actually agrees with it.
I mean, Steve Bannon, there's some weird Venn diagrams.
Feudalism to attack Elon Musk because this is a civil war happening within the MAGA movement. Well,
do we have a stake in who wins, by the way? Is it preferable between us two? Who wins?
The whole point here is this. I do believe that the techno-feudal lords have to be defeated. And this is the number one priority because they have a power that no monopoly capitalist ever had. It's a power that is hardwired into our brains through dopamine secretion and so on. And therefore, they're more dangerous. But at the same time, I'm appalled that people like Steve Bannon, I consider him extremely smart and extremely eloquent, they're more dangerous because, like the Mussolinis of the 1930s, he has a capacity to understand the fears and trials and tribulations of the working class and to co-opt them in a nationalist, sexist, misogynist, anti-Palestinian,
equality, just anti-equality
narrative that the problem is